You know that feeling, the one that starts as a dull throb somewhere in the back of your jaw. Then it sharpens. Then it becomes the only thing in the world. You cannot think, cannot eat, cannot sleep. You press your tongue against the tooth involuntarily, even though you know that makes it worse. You reach for ibuprofen. You book a dentist. You spend 40 minutes on your phone, reading about root canals and convincing yourself you have one. Now take all of that away. No ibuprofen, no appointment, no dentist, no clinic, no anesthetic, no x-ray, no sterile tools, no waiting room with bad magazines. Just the pain, and it is not going away on its own. Because for the overwhelming majority of human history, a toothache was not an inconvenience. It was a crisis, and the people who survived it did not get lucky. They got ingenious. This is what they actually did. And some of it still works. Let us start with what was causing the pain in the first place, because ancient humans had a very different relationship with tooth decay than you do. For roughly 290,000 years, the human diet was low in refined sugar and processed carbohydrates. Hunter-gatherer populations ate meat, tubers, nuts, seeds, and seasonal fruit. Their teeth were put under enormous physical stress from chewing tough, unprocessed food and from using their mouths as a third hand to grip and pull materials. Teeth cracked, wore down, and fractured, but cavities as we understand them were relatively rare. That changed the moment agriculture arrived. When humans began eating grain-heavy diets around 10,000 years ago, dental decay exploded. Researchers examining skeletal remains from early agricultural populations in the Levant and North Africa found cavity rates climbing dramatically compared to their hunter-gatherer predecessors. Softer, starchy food sits in the grooves of teeth. Bacteria feast on it. Acid follows. The enamel gives way. What had been an occasional problem became a chronic one, and the population that now had to deal with it most often was the same population that had invented farming, settled in villages, and no longer had the option of simply moving on. The toothache became a civilization problem, and civilization, being what it is, started solving it. The oldest known dental procedure in human history was discovered not in a city, not in a palace, but in a cave in northern Italy. At a site called Ripley Cave, researchers found a human tooth dating back approximately 14,000 years. Inside that tooth was a cavity, and inside that cavity was something that should not have been there, clear evidence of deliberate excavation. The decayed material had been scraped out using a small flint tool. The edges of the excavation were clean and precise. This was not accidental damage. Someone had performed a filling. They had no anesthetic. Let that register for a moment. A person sat still 14,000 years ago while another person scraped infected material out of their tooth using a sharpened piece of stone. The fact that they did this tells you something important about how much pain they were already in. The alternative was worse. But flint scrapers were only the beginning. At a site in Pakistan called Mehergarh, dating back 9,000 years, researchers found something even more extraordinary. 11 teeth from 9 individuals showed signs of deliberate drilling. The holes were precise, the angles were consistent. The tool responsible, researchers concluded, was a bow drill fitted with a flint tip, the same technology used for making fire, redirected entirely toward dentistry. 9,000 years ago. Bow drill dentistry, no painkiller. Perfectly round holes. The people of Mehergarh were not suffering through this blindly, however, because alongside the drilling, the archaeological and botanical record tells us exactly what they were using to manage the pain while the work was done. Clove, the dried flower bud of a tree native to the Maluku Islands in eastern Indonesia. Its active compound is eugenol, one of the most potent natural analgesics ever identified. When pressed against an exposed nerve, eugenol temporarily blocks the pain signal almost completely. It also carries antimicrobial properties, reducing the bacterial load at the infection site. Clove was not discovered by medieval pharmacists or colonial-era traders. Records from China dating back 3,000 years describe court officials chewing clove before approaching the emperor, both to freshen breath and to treat dental pain. In India, Ayurvedic texts going back at least 2,500 years list clove oil as a standard treatment for toothache. In East Africa, clove was in documented use for centuries before European contact. And here is the part that should genuinely surprise you: modern dentistry still uses it. Zinc oxide eugenol, a compound built on the same active ingredient found in clove, is used today as a temporary dental cement, a cavity liner, and an emergency pulp treatment. Your dentist is using a compound your ancestors discovered by pressing a flower bud against a sore tooth in a forest. Clove was the most effective tool they had, but it was far from the only one. Across cultures and continents, the archaeological and written record reveals a remarkably consistent toolkit for managing dental pain, assembled entirely from what grew within reach. Willow bark was chewed for pain relief across Europe, the Near East, and parts of Asia. Its active compound is salicin, the natural precursor to aspirin. The compound was not synthesized into pharmaceutical aspirin until the late 19th century, but the bark had been doing the same job for thousands of years before anyone understood the chemistry behind it. You were chewing aspirin, you just did not know what it was called. Garlic was pressed directly into cavities. This was not superstition. Allicin, the compound released when garlic is crushed, has genuine antimicrobial properties against the specific bacteria responsible for dental infection. It does not eliminate the pain the way eugenol does, but it slows the progression of the underlying infection. Used correctly, it bought time. Peppermint was used across European and Central Asian traditions. Its menthol compounds create a cooling sensation that briefly interrupts pain signal transmission at the nerve surface. Again, not superstition. Menthol is a legitimate topical analgesic, still found in formulations used today. In ancient Egypt, papyrus medical texts list a specific paste for toothache made from cumin, incense, and onion, applied directly to the tooth and held in place. Whether it worked better than placebo is difficult to say with certainty at this distance, but the cumin component contains compounds with documented anti-inflammatory properties, and the onion contains quercetin, a natural flavonoid with real analgesic effects. The pattern that emerges when you look across all of these treatments is not one of desperate guessing. It is one of systematic empirical observation. Something hurt. You tried a plant. It helped, or it did not. You tried another. You passed on what worked. Over hundreds of generations, the treatments that survived were the treatments that had genuine biochemical mechanisms behind them. The archive of traditional dental remedies is not folklore, it is pharmacology, arrived at without laboratories. But sometimes, the plants were not enough. When infection had set in deeply, when the tooth had abscessed, when the pain had moved from the jaw into the skull, the only option left was extraction. Egyptian dental records from around 3,500 years ago describe specific tools for tooth removal and list instructions for loosening a tooth before pulling it, which means they understood that yanking without preparation caused fractures and made the problem worse. Roman physicians in the 1st and 2nd centuries described bronze instruments for gripping and twisting teeth and instructed practitioners to work the tooth loose over multiple sessions rather than attempting to remove it in a single pull. In medieval Europe, tooth extraction was performed not by physicians but by barbers, who also performed bloodletting and basic surgery. The chair did not yet exist. The patient sat on the floor. The practitioner kneeled behind them, braced their knee against the patient's back, and pulled. This was not ideal technique. Jaw fractures were a documented complication. Infection from the extraction itself was common, but the alternative, leaving the abscessed tooth in place, carried a genuine risk of the infection spreading to the jaw, the throat, or the brain. People died from toothaches. Not metaphorically, not in rare cases. Dental abscess was a leading cause of death in populations without access to antibiotics, because the infection has a direct anatomical pathway into the airway and the brain. Extraction, terrifying as it was often the only thing standing between a person and a fatal outcome. The barber was not a lesser dentist. The barber was the only thing available. The next time a toothache wakes you up at 2 a.m, before you reach for the ibuprofen, before you pull up the dental practice app and book a same-day appointment, take 1 moment to register what is happening. You are feeling exactly what a person 14,000 years ago felt. The same nerve. The same signal. The same involuntary press of the tongue against something that hurts. The difference is that somewhere between that person and you, an unbroken chain of experimentation and observation and passed down knowledge slowly built an answer. The flint scraper became the bow drill. The bow drill became bronze forceps. The clove bud became eugenol. The willow bark became aspirin. Every instrument in your dentist's tray, every compound in the numbing injection, every principle behind the root canal procedure traces a direct line back to someone sitting in a firelit shelter, pressing a flower against a sore tooth, and noticing, for the first time, that it helped. The ibuprofen works faster. But it is not a different solution. It is the same solution, refined across 14,000 years of people who refused to simply endure the pain.